Chapter 11. It was mid-1968 and events were moving fast in the products department. So as to have the respect of CTB, typically each executive had a relevant degree. Beside Laurie Phillips, responsible for marketing the Cooper-Matic, there were now the following: Brian Walling, Industrial Insecticides; Rod Must, Cattle Dips; Keith Matthews, ex-Fisons in Uganda and Thelmintics; John Sanders, born in Tanganyika, Mineral Feed Supplements; Mike Crooks, Vaccines; Stuart Cropper, Aerosols. They shared 3 young secretaries. One day AAG announced he had a new PA, a lawyer the group could no longer place, who would be looking at departmental organizations. The idea was we would no longer have personal secretaries. The senior secretary, in my case Phil Wright, would be responsible for allocating and supervising all the department's secretarial work. This was totally contrary to Phil's interest and experience, and in no time she showed it. She scorned the abilities of the young secretaries, and soon there was trouble. The work in the department must come first, I said to myself. I talked to Phil. She resigned. I sent her a box of chocolates. She sent it back. Now I had allocated to me, to take charge of secretarial work, Gloria Burles. Gloria had nothing like Phil's brain power or secretarial ability, but she was a team builder, and the girls responded. In no time the atmosphere had changed, and the department moved on. ALM was putting pressure on us. He said he wanted to see a global sales and profits report for the Cooper-Matic. Here was the crunch. It was all right for us to think up 1. Better literature, Laurie's latest literature read, a continuous insect control unit, 2 torch batteries will last about a year, can be set up on a wall shelf atop a cupboard, small puffs every 15 minutes, just enough to keep a repellency level to 1,000 to 2,000 per meter. 1 aerosol lasts 3 months if you use 8 hours a day, 7 days a week. 2. Test marks. Laurie was always in Malta, etc. But at the end of the day, what did the profits look like? Laurie loved a challenge. In no time he was getting returns from our subsidiaries, associates and agents around the world, and producing a report that showed that the Cooper-Matic was, in fact, highly profitable. This report went to the Strategic Marketing Unit, who confirmed that, in their opinion, per volume of disinfected space, the Cooper-Matic was far more profitable to us than aerosols or hand machine operated insecticide sprays. A sigh of relief from me. Not that I was easy on my young team. They responded well to macho-style operations. One time we had had an apparently irresolvable problem. I had said to Phil, ring their wives and tell them they may not be home tonight. At 6 o'clock this evening we're going to sit down and tackle this problem. No one will go home until it is resolved. And if we have to sit here all night, so be it. By 8 p.m. we had reached agreement. The irresolvable problem had been resolved. At around this time I was informed a salesman from the manufacturer of a new gadget called a calculator would be making a presentation to department heads. My executives were very keen and lobbied me that I should ensure we got a calculator soonest. Come the day, the salesman demonstrated his 1-foot cube sample machine, and I could see the other more senior department heads getting highly enthusiastic. Delivery would be in 6 months, said the salesman. The meeting broke up, and I hovered around to have a word with the salesman. This 6 months delivery time you quoted, I said, is worth a bottle of Dimple Hague for me to have a calculator sooner than that. For a bottle of Dimple Hague in, I guess you might have the calculator in 6 weeks, he replied. We shook on it, and he left. Back in my office, I rang a taxi driver I knew well. You know, Mr. of the Calculator Company, Well, I can find his office. Get the bottle of Dimple Hague to his desk soonest. I'll pay you cash, I said. The calculator was delivered to our department the next day, much to the astonishment and annoyance of the other department heads. The cost of the whisky came out of my pocket, but I thought it was worth it. Early in the year, Jane had looked up from reading a letter from Ma and said, "I think there's romance in the air." "What?" I said. To me it had read like a normal letter from Ma. I couldn't see any romance in it. But Jane was right. Her 26 years a widow mother, Ma, was soon engaged to be married, and she bubbled with the excitement of it, like a teenager. It was now August, and Ma and Sam were to be married at Ma's home village, Westbourne, where Jane and I were married. Sam MacDonald Smith was a widower who had been a colonial servant in Nigeria and then became Deputy Governor of the Gold Coast, Ghana. His poor eyesight had meant he was unlikely to be of use to the armed forces in the 1939-1945 war, and the British government had been pleased for him to stay as a colonial administrator in West Africa. His wife, Joyce, who limped from an encounter with a crocodile, had been a close friend of Ma. Sam had 2 children, Sarah and Ian, who 2 months later won gold medal in the Flying Dutchman class in the Mexico Olympics, crewing for Rodney Pattison. In October, I was asked to travel through Africa with a senior member of the technical staff working at Pirbright, the Wellcome Foot and Mouth Disease Vaccine FMDV plant. The group was negotiating with the Kenya government on the possibility, if the potential was large enough, of forming a production and marketing unit for FMDV to be sold throughout Africa and wherever relevant strains of the disease existed. Big business potential. The journey started in Kenya. There I met old friends Johnny P. Patterson, and Tony, Tiny Eve. With some reluctance I was persuaded to join them in a hockey practice. I had always been goalkeeper behind those 2, but they said they didn't practice with goalkeepers. So, in no time I was moving clumsily around the pitch, thought I saw a gap in the defence, moved forward aggressively, and my nose met Tony's hard head. Soon I was in hospital having my nose stitched up. Oh well, High Wallace, Cooper's MD, was throwing a tennis party on his plot, and I was invited. There I discovered John K.R., the house servant I had bequeathed confidently to the Wallaces, was no longer in their employ, and so my colleague and I flew on down to Zambia and the Rhodesias, and from there to South Africa. In South Africa, at a country hospital, my stitches were removed by an Afrikaner doctor who refused payment, saying I was a visitor to his country and he was pleased to help me. We came back via Namibia, where I bought a quantity of tiger's eye jewellery for Jane. This I hid carefully in a sock at the bottom of the larger of my 2 cases. "Open up," said the customs officer at London Airport. "What? But I've been on a highly technical job concerning foot and mouth disease vaccine, which could be very important." "Open up," I said. He said. I felt the perspiration starting in my armpits. This was going to be embarrassing and expensive. Trembling a little, I opened the cases, at which, highly professionally, he ran his hands around the inside walls of the case. "All right, move on," he said. Back with AAG, he looked suspiciously at my nose. "Yes, well, I like to keep fit on overseas trips, so I played just a short game of squash and my opponent's racket hit my nose." He looked unconvinced and changed the subject. Perhaps he thought I'd been in a drunken brawl. Anyway, our FMDV was unique and the potential was large. In Berkhamsted, I heard that Bob Hammond, RAH, my old Kenya MD and now a non-exec director there, had been putting it about that I was wanted back in Kenya. I sat in a cafe, lost. A passing woman stopped to inquire if I was well. My second home, Kenya, was where I started as salesman and would go back as a senior exec. But Jane and the children were settled in UK. I loved my present work, and wasn't it more important, presumably, to the group than Kenya? I was torn, and didn't know which way to turn, and what would I do if the rumour were true? It was some years later I learned how important it was to know exactly what to do in such circumstances, to have a plan for one's career, updated regularly. At that time I was a committed Cooper BW man and gave little thought to employment outside the group. So my work moved on. I thought if I was loyal to my employers, similarly they would be loyal to me and Jane and our children. I'd always been impressed by a remark by a farmer, Mr. Betts, my first employer. He said an employer must always be concerned with the fact that he is responsible not just for his employees but also their families. But that was farming, and this was comparatively high-powered veterinary pharmaceutical business. Believe it or not, we just consigned the pottery-frilled lizard to the garbage about a month ago, after 40 years in which it had stayed intact, barring one foot. It finally bit the dust. Mum also gave me a pottery Colonel Harty disc, which used to hang on a wall. That finally disappeared from a glass wall unit about a year ago. Great stuff, Memsab. Don't remember trashing the tree, but do remember trashing the front door. Bloody rugby.